Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I am the CHALL, representing Chall Chats, your sports media network created by the fans for the fans of sports all around the world. And today, Chall Chats, Reading Football Club. So this is a very special exclusive interview, but it's an interview that should never have come to this. Reading Football Club are in a mess of a situation, currently threatened on the pitch by relegation to League Two, but have been hit off the pitch over multiple years with financial penalties, financial regulation breaks, and also an owner that's completely fallen out with the fan base, which led to the event of Reading versus Port Vale, where the match was abandoned by the amazing solidarity between the fans of Port Vale and Reading against the Reading owner. We're joined today by Dave, who represents Sell Before We Dai, a fan-run protest group against the current regime of Reading Football Club. Dave, a wonderful welcome to the channel, Chall. It's obviously not the best circumstances to make your debut on the channel, but thank you very much for coming on today, and I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm good. All good. And as you say, it's not exactly ideal circumstances. It's a pity this couldn't have been 15 years ago. But it would have been a much happier chat. Pleasure to join you.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show. Obviously, there's been a lot of negativity surrounding Reading. I mean, we have to open the show. It feels like we have to open the show with positives because there seems to be a lot of negativity going on at Reading at the moment. So let's just cast our minds back to, I guess 2017 was kind of the major year where it all started to change, really. But let's sort of cast our minds to before that. You were in that final at Wembley against Huddersfield. Obviously, you didn't win the final on penalties. You were under Jaap Stam. I mean, happier times, weren't they?
They were. We seem to have a structure and a strategy within the club to actually sort of put a foundation in place for future progression, which is something that had been sadly lacking for about 5 or 6 years. We were speaking beforehand, and I mentioned Sir John Madejski and who he sold to with Thames Sports Investment, the consortium that were fronted by Anton Zingarovic. There was no plan in place then. It was a house of cards, and it fell very, very quickly. That was superseded or followed on by our Thai consortium. After a season and a half of kind of not really showing any direction, suddenly the guy whose name is known as Tiger, who's now fronting up Oxford United, he started putting in place a sort of a long-term strategy, which include a very Dutch emphasis to it, which is where Jaap Stam came from. Funnily enough, at the time, there was this question over whether or not it was going to be Jaap Stam or some kind of Dutch unknown bloke at Ajax called Erik ten Hag, and it was Jaap Stam that got the job. They say that the football, it's got to be said, the football under him that season it could be mind-numbingly boring at times.
Yeah.
But we ended up with 85, 86 points, I forget exactly how many. Finished third in a season where we probably shouldn't have finished anywhere near that. We did ride our luck a hell of a lot that season, and we took some absolute batterings along the way at Brentford, at Fulham, at Norwich. We conceded 7. But yeah, the signs were there. The green shoots of growth were there. And of course, at half time during the playoff semi-final, second leg against Fulham, was when Dai Yongge and Dai Yongge were announced as our new owners, totally out of the blue. And it's been downhill ever since.
Yeah, and sort of take me back to that moment in 2017 when they were announced as the owner initially. What were your, personally, and also as a fan base, what were your initial thoughts? Were there any concerns about the takeover when it was announced? Were there any background research done by fans to sort of say this is what this guy's about and any previous history?
It was very odd. The timing was very odd. Like you say, we were in the middle of a playoff semi-final with Fulham, and it was announced on the club website halfway through that second leg. So it was totally overlooked by the fact that we just got to Wembley. Nobody really took it in massively at the time. But what we did know, within a sort of a day or two, was that this guy had tried to take over. So we're talking about this guy, Dai Yongge. He's the main protagonist in all of this. This sister is involved as well, Dai Li. But ultimately, it's Dai Yongge who is the guy who's really interested in the football side. The brother and sister had been denied the opportunity of taking over Hull City, who were in the Premier League at the time. Which was very odd, given that the part of the reason why, or the only reason why they hadn't actually taken them over, was because they couldn't pass the Premier League's owners and directors test, or fit and proper persons test at the time. So the questions were being asked: why has he, or have they, not been able to take over Hull, and yet the EFL have waved them through? Now, since in the EFL meeting on Tuesday, it was stated that there was no evidence to not wave them through, which is very odd. You do the Premier League and the EFL not talk? Is the biggest question there, really. And that sort of opens up the wider question of why individual competition organisers need to go through the individual club governance. Why shouldn't it be the FA as the overseer of the national game, and everybody gets fair and equal treatment then? But that's probably another conversation. But as I say, at the time, it was very odd timing, and then in the days afterwards, it was, this doesn't sound good. But he's supposed to be a billionaire. Where is his money? What's his money? What's he done? We know he's Chinese. He doesn't want to talk. All right, he might not want to talk. The occasional statement might be good. But we'll let him. Ultimately, we as fans, as fans of every club do. We didn't give him a free pass, but we put a degree of faith and trust in him and them to do good by the club. And then, initial signs were okay. They spent a bit of money on Shawnee Aluko after we'd lost the playoff final. We needed a striker. Jan Kermorgant was injured for about 6 or 8 months, something like that. We didn't have another striker. So they spent money on Shawnee Aluko, who's not a striker. But it was a sign that he was prepared to put his money in his pocket and actually sort of back the club to go on to that next step. But as things turned out, Jaap Stam's football turned out to be fairly baseless. That we didn't see the progression that we absolutely needed to see on the back of that hugely successful first season with him in charge. And Dai Yongge's been trying to, put out fires, but unfortunately, he's been trying to put them out with petrol. So yeah, it's not worked at all, unfortunately, for him, despite the money that he's tried to put in.
Yeah, and I think there's no secret that Reading have absolutely spent tons and tons of money. When we now think back to what's going on now with the situation and where the club are, where they could be heading next season, which is potentially League Two, is one of the factors in the failure of this ownership era the spending of the money and how it's been spent in terms of how they've improved the squad with players that just haven't improved the squad? Has there been
Improve is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
So has this, we're hearing what, £250 million was spent? Is that £250 million and how it's been spent over these last sort of 7 years? Has that been a major factor in where you are now, where the ownership is now, and how the club is being run now?
Yes, absolutely, it has. It is it's slightly more complex than that, but ultimately, the fact is that the majority of that money has been spent on players who have not performed. They are on massive wages. He's put the money in, but he's also really scuppered money coming in from elsewhere as well, in terms of our best assets being sold for their true market value. For example, Liam Moore was on a ridiculous contract for a championship club of our standing, in excess of £35,000 a week, which is stupid money for for a championship player at Reading Football Club. And I personally don't blame Liam Moore for taking that money, and it was a 4-year contract as well. So why would he turn it down? But equally, the football club should be looking at cashing in on him when clubs come in. Now we know Brighton came in with a substantial bid on multiple occasions, and the club turned it down. The same goes with Danny Loader. Incidentally, Liam Moore left on a free. Danny Namaso Loader, who's now at Porto. He was one of our highly rated youngsters, was in the middle of doing his medical at Wolves for a multi-million-pound move with a year left on his contract, with the usual add-ons that you would get in a deal like that. And the owner pulled the plug on that, and Danny Loader signed for Porto. And of course, we don't get anything from that, even though he was under 23, because it's an overseas transfer. Michael Olise is another one, £8 million. Absolutely nobody can turn around to me and say that Michael Olise's value, true market value, was £8 million. That was the release clause that they put in his contract. It was far too low. The guy was clearly going to be going right up to the top, and is take a look at the other player that Palace signed in recent times, Erik Chieze. He's a better player than him, in my opinion. And should have been going to Palace for more money than him. And Omar Richards is another one, who's now at Forest. He went to Bayern again on a free. Absolutely nothing back to the club, even though we were the club that nurtured him and whatnot. So multiple opportunities to actually cash in on players at a good time in those players' careers. Because let's not forget that Liam Moore's career has probably been absolutely trashed. He hasn't got a club now, but his personal career has been absolutely trashed by the shenanigans that have gone on at Reading Football Club. And it wouldn't surprise me if if and when he retires, he turns around and absolutely goes absolutely hell for leather against the club verbally in the press and whatnot. And I wouldn't blame him. The guy has, on the playing front, he just basically doesn't have a clue. He hasn't had a clue. He spent far too much money on the existing players. Hasn't cashed in on the players because he apparently doesn't like to sell players. And let's not forget that a lot of his advice, the one person who had his ear was a certain Kia Jarabchian, who everybody, it was the worst kept secret that he was the guy who was advising the owner on what to do. And hence why the likes of George Puskas, Lucas Chall, Rafael Cabral, and the likes were all coming in. They were all affiliated to the Kia Jarabchian empire on massive money. These are all going to be beneficial to your club, yada yada yada. Yeah, bollocks. It wasn't. It ultimately it just didn't work. Top quality players, but it's just not worked at all. Because we've not molded a team. We've and most of the time we've molded a team of individuals. And like I say, it's really, really backfired on Dai Yongge.
Yeah, 110%. And obviously this is fully focused on Reading, but the things we were speaking about there about the player sales, not bringing the cash in, and cashing in some of the talent that were exiting for potentially huge money and then pulling the plug, things like that, free transfers. This kind of leads on to like a sort of subtopic to that question, really. It's a little bit of an extension to that question. And that's on the ownership of football clubs and the actual interest in the owner who owns these clubs. The question, it goes off on that big question that everyone needs to be talking about, in my personal opinion, and needs to be put in the media a lot more than it is, in my personal opinion anyway. When it comes to owning a football club, should there be rules in place to make sure it's an owner who genuinely has interest in the club that they are owning, rather than it just being a business where they don't have football IQ in terms of off the pitch, or should there be rules in place where they have a football person as part of their ownership consortium, or multiple football people as part of ownership consortiums? And that includes potential future owners at Reading and other clubs that are going through a mess right now. We know Morecambe's going through a situation. Southend's just recovered from a situation. We know Sheffield Wednesday's still out of love with their chairman at the moment, Chancery. Should there be rules in place where ownership consortiums should have one or multiple people with footballing brains that can maybe indulge the owner and enlighten them on the football side on what to do and what not to do to make the ownership situation at football clubs a lot more stable than it is currently?
Well, there are multiple ways that you could go about stabilizing the whole English football model. You mentioned Morecambe, you mentioned Sheffield Wednesday, you mentioned Southend. You can go back a little bit further. You've got Bolton. You've obviously got the heinous case that happened at Bury. You've got Wigan Athletic, and that's just within the last 3 to 4 years. Derby County, of course, Portsmouth going further back, Leeds. It's a conveyor belt of clubs that go through financial problems. It's just one after the other, after the other, after the other. That is so self-evidently a problem. And the football industry has ultimately hideously failed to regulate itself. Hence why we now have the independent regulator coming in. The issue that football has had up until now, and it has made some small steps ultimately to improve, with the introduction of the fit and proper persons test, or what is now the owners and directors test. And that is, increasingly more stringent. It was revised in 2023, for example, to be, to beef it up. But that's only part of the problem. Is that you get the owner who wants to buy the club. They go through this owners and directors test, and so they pass it and they take over the club. So what happens then? The issue now that you have is that there is no onward testing, and there is absolutely no mechanism in footballing regulations, like the Premier League or the EFL or the National League or the FA or anything, to force a sale of a football club once somebody has taken it over. So the EFL, what we now know is that the EFL, they can disqualify an individual from owning a football club, and that individual has 28 days then to sell the club. What happens if they don't sell the club? Well, they that club ends up being disqualified from the competition that they're in. So in our case, the EFL. That's no use to anybody, because that's everybody being punished. That's the nuclear bomb on everything. That's effectively what happened to Bury. I know the circumstances are slightly different with their owner at the time, but the golden share was the share was removed from Bury as a result of their owner, I believe, from failing to be able to show that he could fund the club, or that the club had the funding. A similar circumstance for us. They couldn't actually force him out. They couldn't force him to sell the club, and that's where we, as a campaign group, are not solely focused on Reading Football Club. We recognise that there is something far greater in the football industry, football world in England to improve for the better, and that's why we're lobbying Parliament, and we're in cahoots with the EFL to hopefully improve football for the better, so that essentially there are the tools for the relevant authorities to be able to actually force and squeeze a nefarious owner out of a football club and out of football altogether. And that's what we need. But the problem you've got is it's not incumbent in the EFL regulations for anybody to actually force them to tell somebody an owner should be selling a club. But also you've got corporate law as well. And nobody can force an individual shareholder to sell their shares, and that's where there needs to be specific football legislation to override corporate law and ensure that football clubs are owned by fit and proper people. Because at the moment, all we're getting, as was mentioned, we've got the conveyor belt of clubs, and the reason why we've got the conveyor belt of clubs is because we've got the conveyor belt of nefarious owners who do not do the right thing. and I'm sure yourself as a Donny fan, and I as a football fan, yes, I'm a Reading fan, and I absolutely cannot stand Oxford United. But it's but I wouldn't want to see them go. It's far more fun to absolutely smash them on the pitch than smash them off the pitch.
Yeah, it's one of them. I'm the same. Rovers fans might hate me for saying this, but I'm not going to shy away from it. On the pitch, I want us to smash Rotherham, Barnsley, Sheffield United, Sheff Wednesday, but I would never wish the death of a football club on any fan base, no matter if they're rivals or not. And this kind of leads nicely into your campaign and the campaign that you and I know a lot of other people have been working with and donating to and helping build, Sell Before We Dai. So we sort of introduced it there a little bit, but for those people out there who don't know who Sell Before We Dai is, and I will leave a link to the website in the description down below as well. Just tell us a little bit more about Sell Before We Dai, the aim, the long-term, the short-term aims, and also what you intend to do going forward as well, once the Reading situation has been resolved and if other situations end up cropping up as well.
So the campaign was formed back in June by a small group of like-minded Reading fans who recognised that this owner was not going to change. We give a brief sort of little bit of background. We obviously received 12 points deductions in 2 successive seasons for financial irregularities. We'd been relegated to League One for the first time in 20 years on the back of that. And our sporting director, who's a man who's Mark Bowen, has been totally hung out to dry in all of this. He spoke to fans at an open forum not long after the relegation and said that he's been assured that we've taken all our medicine, shall we say. And then it was reported that the football club hadn't paid its latest tax bill and had paid the wages late. And so it was basically the same stuff going off again. And it was just like, no, we're not dealing with it. We're not doing this. We're not doing this anymore. And so we formed the group. As I say, it was a bit of a slow burn to start off with, but as the summer wore on, and the issues with Charlie Savage, for example, came to a head, not knowing whether or not he was going to be, even being able to have his registration with the EFL, not even a week before the start of the season. We had, let's say, the issues with non-payment of wages, and the issues with we were supposed to be getting Chris Wilder as our manager, but he apparently pulled out because he could see the light through the trees, if that's any kind of metaphor. So the campaign gradually grew in strength over the summer and into August, and then at the beginning of September, it became apparent that the financial issues were going to be pretty stringent within the club. So hence the protest started with the tennis balls. It was a good game to actually start it off with Bolton. We have a very historic, recent history. We've got quite a historic competitive history with Bolton in recent years. Going back to '95 with the Wembley playoff final. But they were a very supportive club with what we did with the tennis ball protest in the 16th minute, signifying. Of course, by this point, what I haven't mentioned is, of course, we'd received the 4 extra points for the persistent late payment of wages. So it's 16 points in 3 seasons, the first ever club to receive points deductions in 3 successive seasons in English Football League history. It became apparent that the Dai Yongge situation wasn't going to improve, and the protests have just ramped up more and more since then. Nothing has changed in the meantime. In fact, it's progressively got worse, rolling up to a point in time where the club has to decide whether or not it actually pays the wages or pays the taxman a month at the beginning of every month. We saw that the beginning of December, end of November, beginning of December, the non-playing staff hadn't been paid. They'd been paid half their wages, and that was actually covered by so the other half, 2 or 3 days later, was allegedly covered by the main sponsor, Select Car Leasing. So that's when the proverbial hit the fan. we saw the very well publicised, we felt, again, another tennis ball demonstration against Eastleigh at their ground. We deliberately chose that game because it was on live TV. It had just, the issues had just happened with the non-playing staff. And hence why we've got our mantra now: pay the staff, pay the tax, sell the club. And that's literally it. That's all we want. That's all we expect of our club right now. It's the absolute bare minimum. So, but nothing. We were led to believe that the club was in the process of being sold, but we saw a lot of information coming out with a hedge fund called Ginevra. Not exactly ideal, given it's a hedge fund. But at the very least, they would look to see a return, and you've got to give them a reasonable chance. The red flags are there already, I say, or the amber flags at the very least, because it's a hedge fund. And you think hedge fund, you immediately think Coventry City.
Yeah.
And the fact that we don't own our stadium as well now, that's now owned by a subsidiary company of Dai Yongge. We could see us going, down the same route as Coventry City in regards to the stadium. We were led to believe that the sale was progressing, but that all went quiet. And then about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago or so, we put out the minutes, or the notes of a meeting that we had held with the club. That included Dai Yongge, the CEO, who has not been seen at the club since around May, June time, by all accounts. But the protests had clearly rattled him, at the very least, for him to actually want to come and meet us. He assured us that there were going to be no player sales in January. We put the minutes out of that meeting that clearly indicated that the club had agreed as well that there would be no player sales. And a day later, we get a whistleblower from within the club who has said basically Dai Yongge is not intending to sell, and there's going to be a fire sale of players. And within a day of that, we saw, beyond rumours, the press reporting that Tom Holmes and Nelson Abbey were going to be going to Luton Town. Now, Nelson Abbey hasn't gone to Luton, but there was a bid put in. Tom Holmes has gone to Luton and has been loaned back. So essentially, all the stuff that this whistleblower was saying was essentially coming true. And that was when Reading fans went nuclear. We, as a campaign group, took the considered decision to say we can't withhold that from the fan base.
Yeah.
And so we let them know. Essentially, we said, we let them know, and that's when it all went nuclear. We said, come and join us on the pitch after the game. But the fan base had the idea of actually calling the game off. So it's important to note that we didn't actually call for the abandonment as a campaign group. Sell Before We Die. We said, come and join us on the pitch. We were all for an on-the-pitch demonstration after the Port Vale game. But matters were taken out of our hand. Not that we were in any way anti that, but the fan base felt stronger. And we've kind of truck and traded that and used it to our advantage. And there has been what seems to be a very significant shift in attitude towards both us as a campaign group and towards actually selling the club from the owner and the football club. So by and large, that's a very long way of saying this is where it all came from. But by and large, it's largely been positive. Although we don't want to be doing this.
Yeah, it shouldn't have ever got to this stage. It should never have got to this stage with any football club, let alone the situation at Reading currently. Just sort of shifting back a bit to that, what I like to call Judgement Day for the fans. It was the sort of nuclear explosion, really. Obviously, like you said, the campaign was all for doing some kind of demonstration on the pitch at full time. But as you said, the fan base took matters into their own hands. And the Reading game against Port Vale at the Medeski was abandoned in the end. It was suspended initially, then became abandoned. Even though your initial plan was very different, obviously it got taken out of the campaign's hands because of the strong reaction of the fan base towards the owner. When you look back on that day, we all saw the scenes. I remember it clear as day. I was stood in the stadium. I was studying Doncaster Rovers, and I see the updates coming through from the Reading game that it had been suspended. I see why it's been suspended. Then I see it's been abandoned, and I'm in shock and awe, but also I'm in complete applause for the Reading fans that stood up for their football club. And how proud does that make you as a Reading supporter? Obviously, you're part of the Sell Before We Die campaign. Your plans were very different initially. But as a Reading supporter, how proud does it feel that your fans and the fan power is still there? Because we saw that with United fans in protest of the Super League against Liverpool, about they got that game abandoned, and they did that by breaking through security, getting on the pitch and cancelling the game. We see Reading fans getting on the pitch, 15, 20, nearly 20 minutes into that match, and they force a game to be cancelled because of their detest towards the ownership of the club. How impressed and how proud are you as a Reading supporter that fans had the power to do that, and also the documentation of that particular game and that whole pitch invasion and protest?
On a personal level, it's bittersweet, because Reading fans are renowned for being quite a passive bunch, passive fan base. So for it to get to this point should indicate to every single football fan in this country that it's not a very good situation, to say the least. For Reading fans to actually take the measures and steps that they have, I am immensely proud to be associated with that esprit de corps, I suppose. I work for the MOD, so that's a phrase that is often used in my line of work. That camaraderie, that togetherness, and for the majority of the supporters, even not that everybody went on the pitch, there were enough supporters who weren't able to or weren't willing to go on the pitch, but absolutely supported what was going on. And applauded those that stayed on the pitch and got the game abandoned. The problem stems from the reason why it got to that point, and it's a little bit of a light bulb moment over the last week or so for us, is that fans are recognised as absolutely essential and integral to the whole sport of football, and yet we have no power. We have no ultimate power. And we saw that attitude laid bare with Simon Jordan on TalkSport when he was talking to both Paul Mann of Elm Park Royals and then Kaz Parker of the campaign group with the successive days. We saw the attitude of insiders within football through his mouthpiece. Football fans, as I say, don't have any power at this moment in time, and they need to have power. And this is where the independent regulator could strengthen its arm by ensuring that supporters' trusts have a stronger and more legitimate say in the running of their club and the oversight of the very least, the supervision of their club. I think everybody in football recognises that a football club needs an owner or a group of owners, be it supporters like Exeter City, being supporter-led, or being like the benevolent dictator approach that the majority of football clubs take. A football club needs an owner, and it with the model that we have in English football, it needs extra funding. But that funding, in our case, has been massively excessive, to the extent where 2 to 3 years ago, our accounts indicated that we were spending 230+% of our turnover on player wages, which is just totally unsustainable. And we've seen it again. With Portsmouth was a very similar situation where they massively overspent. And this is where fans, where they see this kind of thing going on, need to be able to legitimately question what is the future strategy. How are we going to balance this out over the next 3 years? Because that's essentially what the profit and sustainability regulations adhere to. It's the whole three-year rolling cycle. Fans need to legitimately be able to ask that question, and they need to be able to essentially pull an alarm cord with the EFL when they see things that aren't essentially, looking for the right phrase, but essentially they aren't good. It's not beneficial to their club. It's not healthy for their club. And so this is where the independent regulator needs its teeth. They need to be able to look at individual competition regulations, so EFL, Premier League, National League, Southern League, Northern League, whatever. But particularly with the professional game. And they need to, not just have the owners and directors test, a stringent owners and directors test that is fit for purpose and that is consistent across all professional clubs. And this is another bugbear, as personal bugbear of mine, that the EFL's owners and directors test isn't anywhere near as stringent as the Premier League's. So why should two professional clubs in separate divisions have different levels of scrutiny? And secondly, why are competition organisers being expected to undergo or undertake all of this governance activity that the custodians of our national game, the Football Association, should be doing? It shouldn't be that difficult for a club, for all professional football clubs, to be able to pay into a specific pot that the FA uses to undertake all of the relevant tests. So you've got the issue with the owners and directors test, but then once an individual or a group have passed the owners and directors tests, so what? What's going to happen then? They're just, at the moment, they're just left to go on their merry way and do whatever the hell they want, which is exactly what's happened with Reading Football Club. So I understand that the independent regulator will have periodic monitoring, which is a positive. But what we need is not only for fans to have that red cord pull if they see things that are going wrong. We also need the right level of authority for the EFL to be able to supersede company law and say, you're not a fit or proper person to run a football club. Sling your hook. Licensing. We need a license. Essentially with the license, if you don't have the license, then you can't run the football club. Out you go. You've got to go. And that's where we need to be able to supersede company law, because at the moment there is nothing in company law that states that an individual has to sell their shares in a private limited company. And that is a fundamental problem.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I will also add to that by saying, in my personal opinion, an independent regulator also needs to add, and this is just a personal preference of mine, and I think someone actually mentioned this during the Bolton debacle when they were given a 7-day extension and Barry went out of the Football League. There should also be, in my personal opinion, a pre-qualification test to even be considered to become an owner of a football club, and that pre-qualification test must extend from the Premier League right down to even grassroots level to protect every single level of the game. And also, and when I look at the Championship, League One, League Two, for example, when I look at those three divisions, and then I see in between it, you've got the Premier League, which has got all this broadcasting, all these sponsors, all these multi-million-pound deals that help fund, the Premier League's income and makes it one of the richest and one of the most watched about leagues in the world. And you also see the Vanarama National League now, which used to be the conference and things like the Blue Square Premier League. But you look at the Vanarama sponsorship, you look at TNT Sports' coverage of it, the new National League TV that's come in this season in the past year or two. You look at things like that and the amount of income that's going to come into the National League now as well. It's sort of like, where's the sponsorship or the broadcasting deal for the Championship, League One, League Two that's fair to everyone, that could also increase the income into these divisions, which will help clubs, and will also help the EFL and the Premier League and the National League, if a club is in crisis, develop some kind of stability fund or some kind of fund some kind of department within the authorities, where if an owner is caught doing something wrong that is not in the laws of the game, that is not in the laws of owning a company or running a business or running a sport club or a team or a franchise or whatever it may be, to have a self-appointed football league administrative team. I call it administrative team. It might not be administration. It might be something else, but some kind of team that can step in, prove that they're doing wrong, take control away from the football club, and have those authorities in place to help complete the transition from one owner to another without the fans suffering even more. That's where I stand on the situation in terms of extra things that the independent regulator needs to add.
All very, very sensible. I'll just step in there briefly. That essentially the sustainability fund is something that has been very, very often discussed within our WhatsApp group, and is something that we would love to be able to take up with the EFL when the time is right. So yeah, every single club should have that opportunity or that responsibility to pay into that fund to ensure, at the very, very least, that if a club enters financial difficulty mid-season, that the staff at that football club, the players at that football club, and everybody and all the creditors at that football club are going to be essentially serviced, and to at very least the end of the season. And that is where that's where football could do so much better, because at the moment it's almost like an I'm all right, Jack approach to it. You know, we talk about the football family, but when times are hard, this is where we see people really come out the woodwork and actually see people's true character. And and something I can hear already fans of certain clubs listening to what I'm saying with that specific phrase and think, well, you weren't, you weren't exactly great to us. You know, we're talking about Portsmouth fans here, and we're talking about Derby fans. We've got Derby on Tuesday night. That's going to be an interesting game. But Portsmouth, for example, weren't very sympathetic towards our plight, particularly in light of our march that we had at the back end of October. That was an interesting day, because we weren't particularly sympathetic to their plight back when they had their issues. There are underlying inter-club issues, I think, surrounding that, and a slightly short-sighted approach from Reading fans, but equally, at the time, I think Reading fans, well, there was a degree of justification to it. Derby, not so. But yeah, ultimately, even if Reading fans have had to take a degree of medicine, if ever there was a club that epitomizes that you are only one bad owner away from oblivion, then essentially it's Reading Football Club, because we've seen the absolute epitome of football ownership with Sir John Madejski, who was brilliant for Reading Football Club over 20 years. And we've then seen the absolute opposite with Dai Yongge. The football family needs to really take a closer look at itself, really. And we've seen, if we were to go just sort of carry on with that point, we look at Port Vale and the way that their fans supported the pitch invasion and everything that went on that day, and everything that's happened since, with Reading fans donating the best part of £10,000 to their John Rudge statue over the course of a week, and it's still growing. That fund apparently has been going for about 3 years, and we've already put 10% towards it on the back of what's gone on, simply because we recognise that Port Vale fans supported our cause. They've been there before, Port Vale fans. They recognise what we were going through, and they were sympathetic. we're very, extremely apologetic to the fact that they've come down to see 16 minutes of totally totally negligent football. But the response that we've had from them and their supporters' trust since then has been absolutely magnificent, and all credit to them for their attitude towards us, because their attitude is simply, you've got to do what you can to save your club.
Absolutely. It's clubs are the bedrock of communities, and it's the amount of attention that they bring to the communities and bring to different places. It brings people together. It creates memories. It brings through generations. It allows people to go away from their problems and or it should let them go away from their problems and just be able to enjoy their day. If they've had a tough week, they can enjoy their Saturday, being at the stadium, being amongst a second family. It almost feels like that's how I feel with Doncaster Rovers. I know you're the same with Reading. It very much feels like a second family with a football club, and that's how it should feel. It shouldn't feel like one problem going into another problem the next day or during the weekend or whatever it may be.
And you know what? It's more than just football as well. Football is it's ultimately, the football club is all aimed at the 11 players on the pitch, be it the women's team or the men's team. But football clubs are so entrenched within their local communities now that there are so many services and so many facilities and so much funding from football clubs' community trusts that goes into local communities. It is so much more than just football now. So you lose you essentially lose a bedrock, part of the bedrock of a community if you lose a football club, as I'm sure any Bury fan would testify. And that's what gets missed in all of this. It's not all about anymore the 11 players on the pitch or the 22 players on the pitch. It's about so much more. And a successful football club breeds, more sort of community integration. But there's still that community integration with Reading right now. The community trust do absolutely wonderful things in Reading and the surrounding area. But they are seriously hamstrung with what's going on. And so, the local community is suffering as a result of that. It's not the be all and end all. Don't get me wrong, it's not the absolute be all and end all of everything within, but there are recognizable, in Reading, there are recognizable blue and white light in the surrounding area. And it would be absolutely devastating to lose that.
100%, 100%. And I would feel the exact same if I was in this position with Doncaster Rovers in my lifetime. I know Roller Rovers fans would be in that position again, potentially. But, if I was ever in that position in my personal lifetime, I would be gutted to lose things that we do in the community, and if I ever lost my football club. So I feel exactly the same as you do if I was in that position. Finally then, and I guess this is kind of like a sort of summary question, if we will, looking ahead to hopefully a bright future, but we just don't know. I mean, what's the latest that we sort of know about the situation? Is there still potential buyers on the table? Is there anything going on that you could make us aware of that you may know as part of the campaign? Or obviously with the rest of the season coming up, are there more scheduled protests to come depending on how this situation shifts over these next few months of the season, the last few months of this particular season? Obviously, things will also depend on your potential survival, potential relegation to League Two. What's the future looking like, at least till the end of this season?
In the short term, we are aiming to move away from in-match protests or match disruptive protests. We recognise that there is going to be a punishment to the football club for the abandonment. It's looking like that's going to be very, very lenient, all things considered, from the EFL, which is a bonus for us. We're looking at hopefully 3 points suspended, which would be on a par with what Blackpool had back in 2015 when they had their final day match abandoned against, I think it was Huddersfield.
No draw.
So we're looking to move away from that. There will still be visual protests in the stands. We're looking at banners and tifo and and all that kind of stuff. But we think the nuclear button has been pressed. It's no, we're not going to, go. I'm not sure if I can say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. We're not going to go Nagasaki to Hiroshima, as it were. We've had our Hiroshima. We are going to be looking at taking the protest to Dai Yongge personally. We believe he's in China at the moment still. We believe that there are, at the very least, civil charges against him in China now, relating to loans taken out against his companies over there, which he has then sold on but not declared these loans that have been taken out. And so he's being done civilly at the very least, for fraudulent activity. But yeah, we're going to be taking it to, we know that he's a gambler. We know he enjoys more than the occasional evening down a casino. He has frequented Les Ambassadeurs, which is a high-end casino just off Hyde Park. We've taken the protest to them. We're going to be taking it to wherever he happens to be going next. We're looking into that at the moment. And behind the scenes, we're going to be looking longer term at the independent regulator, trying to ensure that the independent regulation is fit for purpose, has the required teeth to be able to do what it needs to do with nefarious football club owners. And also work with the EFL to try to strengthen their regulations as well, if we can. While also, that's going to be slightly more difficult because ultimately it's the football clubs that agree that, and the football clubs, as the turkeys, will not vote for Christmas. That is a problem. That's where a lot of the problem stems from. Is that whole turkeys and Christmas thing? So that's where we stand at the moment in terms of any planned protests. There isn't actually anything planned at the moment, but discussions are ongoing about exactly what we want to do. What I will say potentially is we play Bolton on the 1st of April Fool's Day. Bolton isn't a million miles away from Preston, where the EFL headquarters is located. There may be something going on up there. And also our last home game, and this is all dependent, I think, on whether or not the club is still in the same situation on the last day of the season, actually, is against Blackpool, a club who I know are very sympathetic to our plight, given what they've gone through in recent years with the Oystons. We don't know exactly what's going to go on, but there may well be some kind of joint protest from there. But ultimately, the longer term aim is to sort of corral the wider football community and to the problem of football ownership, of wider football ownership. It's not just a Reading problem. Our primary focus is Reading, of course, but we want to be able to take this campaign to a far wider remit and have the authorities recognise that football does have an ownership problem. It's not just Reading, and we need to get everybody on board with that and get the regulations changed accordingly.
Yeah, 100% agree with everything you said tonight. I think listening to this, I think people will be very, very aware about the situation of Reading, things they may not have known before, things they have known before. We know that football has problems. We know it's going to take a lot of time to solve them. However, we are going to try as fans to try and force these steps and to try and make people aware through media and content that these steps need to be taken sooner and more stricter rather than later and more leniently. Interviews like this and doing interviews like this, and the reason why I wanted to do this tonight is because, or obviously Sunday when this goes out, is because I want to make people aware of club situations, sports situations, get people talking and get the mainstream media talking a lot more than they have been doing in previous years. We know that the Bury situation, we know that Sky Sports, for example, they came under a lot of criticism about the very situation because it was treated, as some fans called it, like transfer deadline day.
The whole the timer, it's ridiculous. It's so crass. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it came on. It was under a very, very specific and very angry microscope, that situation, and how the outlet dealt with that. With what the fans, the fans basically called them out of touch, called Jim White out of touch. And obviously Simon Jordan's had his word about Reading this past couple of weeks. We know that he's been talking on TalkSport about it. I mean, again, his comments came under a bit of scrutiny, didn't they?
They certainly did. What we found with Simon Jordan, he was very openly critical. I wouldn't even say constructively critical of Paul Mann of Elm Park Royals. But what we saw with that was almost the defensive mechanism flying up from football club owners and the wider sort of football hierarchy, as it were. Essentially saying that fans have no right to try and seize control or take control of the narrative, and that's essentially what we were doing. So we actually had Paul Mann on there on Monday, who was openly criticised. Paul dealt with Simon very, very well, and then we had our very own Kaz Parker, who went on the next day and took Simon Jordan to task and actually softened him somewhat. And Kaz Parker, I didn't know her before the campaign. I now know her really, really well. She's a very strong character, and she's somebody that I would quite happily go to war with. She took Simon Jordan to task big time. But yeah, ultimately Simon's immediate take was that it was typically Simon Jordan contrarian, taking the contrarian view. But it was very, very clear that he had just, the football defense mechanism had shot up in the face of fan criticism. And that's a dangerous place to be if you're a club owner, because you are only one bad decision away then from at the very, very least, poor publicity. And in Simon Jordan's case, of course, he openly admits that, he wasn't able to fund Crystal Palace. But ultimately, let's not forget that Simon Jordan will go down, whether by design or not, as a failed club owner. And so he needs to be very, very careful with how he approaches these things in future. I'm sure he's not going to listen to me as a bog standard football fan. But, he's a divisive character, at the very least. I think he knows that. But he needs to be careful with how he approaches these things, I think.
Yeah, I think he knows for a fact that he's someone who, at the very least, gets people talking, putting it nicely. He gets people talking about what he's said 100%. And as you say, like these kind of situations has to be taken with a degree of caution. I 100% agree with you on that. And we shall see how the situation develops between now and the end of the season and going forward as well. Dave, thank you very much for coming on the show and just sharing your knowledge, your club situation, and just basically educating people that may not know about the situation. Like we said, we'll leave links to Sell Before We Die in the description down below. So if you want to get involved, check out more about the situation, check out anything to do with the situation and get involved with the group, then please go use the links in the description down below. Dave, thank you very, very much for coming on the show tonight.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you guys for watching as well. Like I said, please do, if you haven't joined the Supporters Trust yet, go and join your Supporters Trust at your respective football clubs, because it is so crucial to become a part of the future success of football clubs. Please do follow your football clubs. Go follow your local football clubs as well, because it's so important to get the finances improved at grassroots and non-league level. Please go and follow any club that you can, any sport that you can, support your local sports, because it's so crucial. But for now, guys, thank you very, very much. I am the CHALL. Ta-ra for now.